ABC News. It's like no other news podcast out there. Even the critics agree. Listen free on Apple Podcasts.
Well, when will we return to normal? I don't think we return to normal. I don't think we return to yesterday, where we were. I think if we're smart, we achieve a new normal.
As we yearn for a COVID-free future, we are confronted by the stark realities of where we are. Recovery rooms transformed into an ICU. Hotspots across the U.S. bracing for the surge as New York once again reports its deadliest day. And yet, signs of hope. A new model suggests the number of American deaths may not be quite as high as originally projected. And what and when did the White House first learn about this pandemic? An ABC News investigation reveals there were red flags as early as November. Overseas, a look at what this virus can do in the developing world. Body bags in the streets of a city in Ecuador. Before this pandemic, what most scientists considered to be the biggest threat to the world. Animals dying at an alarming rate. The biodiversity of the planet now in jeopardy. And we continue to search for moments of levity. Couples dancing on rooftops while in quarantine. And a hero's welcome for someone who just beat COVID-19. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. And happy Passover. It is a tradition that has been observed during dire circumstances throughout history. It is a story that, of course, involves prayer and plagues, and in large part is about coming together, and so many still doing so tonight, celebrating virtually amid this pandemic. We begin tonight with New York and New Jersey. Both had record death totals in the past 24 hours. Together, the two states have now had more deaths than the rest of the country combined. But in the midst of all the suffering, a memo to the staff at New York Presbyterian Hospital. They had more people go home yesterday than come in their hospital system. And as each patient leaves, they blast the Journey song, "Don't Stop Believin'," over the speakers. ABC News Live anchor Tom Yamas leads us off from New York City with rare access inside an ICU on the front lines of this fight.
Tonight, a rare glimpse at some of the toughest moments healthcare workers are facing every day in the war on the coronavirus. Dr. Daniel Nicola, an anesthesiologist, tasked with keeping critically ill patients from dying.
We are face to face with these patients who are breathing rapidly, coughing, producing sputum, and we need to place the breathing tube to properly oxygenate them and keep them alive.
And if that sounds difficult, there are even tougher moments. Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn bringing us into a makeshift ICU. That's Dr. Nicola on the phone, informing someone their loved one, who they likely haven't seen for days, is not doing well. Dr. Nicola ripping off his mask. He needs a moment, away from the chaos, away from the sadness.
One of the parts of our job is delivering bad news to patients. Honestly, it's one of the more psychologically exhausting parts of the job. So telling someone that their family member may not make it, it really does, it takes a lot.
A nurse telling us there's no doubt about the viciousness of this disease.
I was one of the people that, said this is fake, this is not true, this is gonna be fine, we'll get over it, this is the flu. It's not the flu. This is so far from the flu.
Death from COVID-19 still so rampant. The death toll in New York State climbing again to a record level, 779 in just the last day.
The bad news isn't just bad, the bad news is actually terrible. Highest single day death toll yet. The number of deaths will continue to rise as those hospitalized for a longer period of time pass away.
But still, every day there are encouraging signs. Fewer new patients are heading to hospitals, and new hospitals are popping up, including this one inside the country's largest Gothic cathedral. This is St. John the Divine, and it looks completely different. First of all, you notice the rows of chairs are gone, and that white hospital tent underneath the Easter decorations. Remember, they were getting ready for Holy Week. The plan is to have 10 to 20 hospital tents stretching all through here, right up to the high altar. They hope to have hundreds of hospital beds to treat any patients that need the care. And in another corner of the church, we see this, the chapel. Hospital beds spread out everywhere.
The cathedral has always been a place for spiritual healing, and now it's being used as a place for physical healing.
In New York, 41 transit workers killed and 1,500 infected with the virus. Melody Aravena's husband, Rolando, he was a communications field technician sent to New York Hospital to help prepare for the surge. A week later, he was sick.
If he had to die to save other people's lives, you know, I'm going to try to make amends with that.
Rolando passing away on his twin daughter's 10th birthday. Melody remembering their last words to each other on FaceTime.
He just looked at me and he said, Mel, I never knew a love like this before, and I love you so much.
In the wake of so much loss, signs of hope that social distancing is working. The University of Washington now projecting a lower national death toll over the coming months. 60,415 deaths by August 4th, deaths peaking on April 12th.
What's really important is that people don't turn these early signs of hope into releasing from the 30 days to stop the spread. It's really critical, and you can see the delay. So if people start going out again and socially interacting, we could see a very acute second wave very early.
But around the country, hotspots still growing in places like Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Louisiana, Chicago, Detroit, and Pennsylvania. Florida, which issued its stay-at-home order weeks after other states, is now seeing a surge in cases. The governor announcing they are turning their convention center in Miami Beach into the area's third field hospital.
And Tom Yamas joins us now from inside St. John the Divine Cathedral. They're now setting up this hospital, and supplies are just coming in. Tom, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Lindsay. This hospital tent you see behind me, this white medical tent, it just went up today. They hope to have at least 10 to 20 medical tents. They're going to start with 50 hospital beds, hopefully expanding to 100. Officials aren't sure if they're going to need all the space in here, but they want to be ready. And you can see just behind me, those are Easter decorations. We have to remember this is Holy Week, Lindsay, and this is sort of one of these strange sights that we've seen along with that field hospital in Central Park. You know, in this job, we see a lot, but this is something that's truly bizarre. It speaks to the sort of the times that we're living right now. And Tom, you've spent a lot of time with frontline workers this week and beyond. What's the most surprising thing that you're hearing from them? You know, I hear time and time again from doctors in Boston, New York City, in New Orleans. They say how this virus has surprised them. They see patients who are doing well 1 minute, and then suddenly the virus and the patient take a turn, and that patient is fighting for their life. Today, we spoke with a nurse over at that hospital in Brooklyn who admitted to us, he said, listen, I didn't think this was going to be a big deal. I thought this was going to be the regular flu, and it's clearly not the flu. Tom Yamas for us tonight, again in New York City. Thanks, Tom. And let's turn now to Washington and an ABC News exclusive about early warning signs about the threat of COVID-19. Sources tell ABC News that U.S. medical investigators overseas filed an intelligence report warning of a potential coronavirus crisis as early as November, with one source saying analysts concluded it could be a cataclysmic event. Those warnings reached the Pentagon and the White House months ago, but was any action taken, and how is the president responding now? ABC's Jonathan Karl has more from Washington.
ABC News has learned U.S. intelligence agencies were warning way back in November that an out-of-control disease was sweeping through China. The dire warning was detailed in a report by the military's National Center for Medical Intelligence. As recently as 2 days ago, President Trump said nobody saw the warning.
This came out of nowhere. Nobody would have ever thought a thing like this could have happened.
The November intelligence report determined the virus was changing patterns of life in China and posing a threat to U.S. forces in Asia. Analysts concluded it could be a cataclysmic event. A source familiar with the report tells ABC News, adding the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon's Joint Staff, and the White House were briefed multiple times. George Stephanopoulos asked the defense secretary about the warnings.
But did the Pentagon receive an intelligence assessment on COVID in China last November from the National Center for Medical Intelligence of DIA?
Oh, I can't recall, George, but we have many people that watch this closely.
By early January, sources tell ABC News, the information was included in the president's daily intelligence brief. But later that month, the president said the threat was under control.
We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China, and we have it under control. It's going to be just fine.
Tonight, the president responded to the ABC News report.
When did you first learn about the intelligence, and could you have acted on it then?
Well, I learned when I learned about the gravity of it was sometime just prior to closing the country to China. And when we closed up the flights coming in from China and various other elements, and then, as you know, we closed up to Europe. So I don't know exactly, but I'd like to see the information.
And Jonathan Karl joins us now. John, this is the second report this week about potential early warnings of the seriousness of this COVID-19 threat. The president says he didn't want to create panic, but beyond stopping some travel from China, is there any sign that the White House did anything behind the scenes to prepare for this threat after these warnings?
Well, you know, the big move and the move the president talks about all the time was the move that came on January 31st to shut down travel from China. I don't see evidence of a major effort to mobilize for dealing with the pandemic before that. The president, in fact, on a number of occasions himself, of course, downplayed the threat. Now, he has subsequently said that what he was doing was trying to be a cheerleader for the United States, not to make people, needlessly panic. And he says that as soon as he saw the warnings that were so severe, he made that move to shut down travel from China, which was a move that was, in fairness, criticized certainly by some members of Congress.
Jonathan Karl for us tonight in Washington. Thanks, John. And now to a major development in the 2020 race. Senator Bernie Sanders announced today that he'll suspend his campaign for the White House. So barring anything unforeseen, that means that former Vice President Joe Biden will likely secure the Democratic nomination and face off with President Trump this fall. So what drove Sanders' decision, and will his supporters get behind Biden? Here's ABC's Mary Bruce.
Bernie Sanders dropped out today, telling supporters victory was, quote, virtually impossible.
I wish I could give you better news, but I think you know the truth.
Sanders' path to the nomination had become increasingly unrealistic ever since Joe Biden's big Super Tuesday comeback. And as the coronavirus crisis grew, so did the question.
This feels a little bit like it did when you didn't come out when Hillary Clinton was clearly the person folks were going for. So can you explain why you're still in the race and what this path is that you see?
Well, one of the reasons, that's not quite accurate. I worked as hard as I could for Hillary Clinton.
Today, Sanders gave in.
I cannot, in good conscience, continue to mount a campaign that cannot win and which would interfere with the important work required of all of us in this difficult hour.
And Mary Bruce joins us now from Washington. Mary, Sanders clearly has a following, large following, but he wasn't able to build a big enough coalition. So what's being done now to get his supporters to unite behind Joe Biden?
Yeah, that is the real big challenge going forward. You are right. Bernie Sanders sparked a massive political movement with fiercely loyal followers, and now Joe Biden has to try and get them on board with his vision for the country and the future. Biden is already reaching out to them, making overtures to Sanders' supporters. And interestingly, President Barack Obama, who has notably really sat on the sidelines throughout this entire presidential race, has been in touch with Bernie Sanders and some of the other previous 2020 candidates about how they can best unite the party going forward. And Lindsay, we should also note that while Sanders has suspended his campaign, he is still on the ballot in states that still have primaries in the coming months. That means that he can still gather delegates, and that will give him some leverage going forward as Sanders hopes he can continue to try and change and influence the party's platform, especially on the issue of health care in this critical crisis.
And how is Biden's campaign looking ahead? And what's the latest on his VP search process?
Well, Well, he is already plowing ahead when it comes to picking a running mate. Of course, he's already promised that that person will be a woman. And today he said that by the end of this month, he will have a plan in place to vet potential running mates. And he was asked if he would announce that person in June after the last primaries are held. And he said that's, quote, not a bad idea. Lindsay.
Mary Bruce, thank you for that report from Washington. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is still in intensive care at St. Thomas's Hospital in London after testing positive for COVID-19. A spokesperson says that the Prime Minister continues to make steady progress. He is clinically stable and his condition is improving. Earlier this morning, an official reported that Johnson is in good spirits, sitting up in bed and speaking with doctors. Johnson was diagnosed on March 26th, admitted to the hospital 10 days later and moved into ICU Monday after his condition deteriorated. Johnson is the first world leader to be infected by the coronavirus. His fiancée, Carrie Simmons, who was pregnant, revealed that she had COVID symptoms but wasn't tested and is now on the mend. As America fights against coronavirus, remember, for all of its flaws, we still have one of the best healthcare systems in the world. But what about the developing world? As we know, this virus continues to spread across the globe. Europe, Asia, and of course North America have been hard hit by COVID-19. The virus is now on every continent except Antarctica. But tonight we turn our attention to South America, specifically Ecuador, where in one city there are body bags literally in the streets. Victor Oquendo has a horrifying look now at what this pandemic could do to nations with less robust medical care.
The images are hard to bear. In Ecuador's port city of Guayaquil, officials have been struggling to keep up with the surging number of deaths. It's a fate no one should have to succumb to. The indignity, bodies abandoned on streets, families pleading for help. As this virus spreads, it's a glimpse of what it could do in the developing world. A nightmare with no end in sight. Everywhere you look, there just aren't enough resources. The morgues are at capacity, so they place bodies inside shipping containers, stacked one on top of the other, as families try to repatriate their loved ones. Marcos Ortega went looking for his grandfather.
Estoy aquí, ya tengo, hoy día mi abuelo ya cumple ya 6 días ya de haber fallecido. Estoy aquí día, tarde y noche, duermo aquí, amanezco aquí.
There's no reprieve from a grim fate here. Doctors say there just aren't enough medical supplies to treat everyone. Dr. Esteban Ortiz Prado is an epidemiologist consulting the president and other high-level officials during this pandemic.
And those patients that are older will die with no medical attention in hours. So if you don't give them a respirator, in hours, they will die. That's why the mortality rate is so fast in Ecuador in relationship with other parts of the world, because these people just didn't get the chance to get medical attention.
The crisis has left the local and federal government scrambling. At one point, Guayaquil's mayor took to Twitter pleading for help. Now, thousands of these cardboard boxes are being distributed in place of coffins. A website has been set up for those waiting for bodies to be removed from their homes. The line to bury the dead is endless. Others decide not to wait. They dig their own plots. Governments are meant to protect its most vulnerable, and the Ecuadorian government knows it failed.
The response in managing bodies and corpses was also a mess. In managing hospital personnel was also a mess. They didn't hire people fast enough.
Officials tell ABC they believe they were able to trace the outbreak back to at least 2 people and places. The first was this soccer game where at least 5 people tested positive. And then there was this woman, Bella Lamila, who we're told had traveled from Madrid, Spain. She died March 13th. But the tracking, like in most of the world, came too little, too late. And there just aren't enough tests here to track all of the country's cases. There won't be accurate numbers to show the breadth this disease has had on the Ecuadorian people. Their only proof? The cadavers on the roads, waiting for a proper burial. Victor Oquendo, ABC News, Miami.
Our thanks to Victor for that. And when we come back, it could be the biggest threat facing our planet, the unprecedented loss of wildlife across the globe. We'll have an in-depth look at the biodiversity crisis, decades in the making, and why it could make us more susceptible to pandemics. Refunds or travel credit? What do airlines have to give you during the COVID-19 crisis? Next, why one man is suing United, and the senator's so angry he's calling for immediate action. The investigation that's now underway after a disturbing incident caught on camera that appears to show an officer coughing near residents on purpose. But first, here are some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
I think that the CDC has come out with a lot of new and guidelines are changing, recommendations are changing, and I think a lot of us in healthcare are wondering, are the changes being made for our PPE because that's what's best for us, or are they being made because they know that our PPE supplies are being stretched? Instead of advising everyone to wear cloth masks, everybody stay home. It's 7 p.m. You guys, it's 7 p.m. and they're doing the thing. They're doing the thing. Oh my gosh, you guys, this makes me cry almost every dang time. That gives me such a boost and such hope that we're gonna unite. We're gonna fight this bad boy because this virus is vicious.
They're doing the thing, as you just heard her say. For those who are not familiar with it, every night at 7 o'clock, residents of New York City cheer those who are on the front lines of this epidemic. Police in Baltimore are investigating a sergeant who was filmed repeatedly coughing near residents in one neighborhood. In the disturbing video that they became aware of after it was posted, the officer appears to do so on purpose, and to the shock and anger of people who are nearby. The department calls the video disturbing and incomprehensible, considering the guidance they provided regarding COVID-19. And now to the backlash for some airline customers over flights canceled by the COVID-19 pandemic. As so many Americans struggle with expenses right now, a new class action lawsuit against United Airlines is seeking full refunds for passengers of canceled flights instead of just vouchers for future travel. And as one senator says, Congress may soon get involved. Here's ABC's Gio Benitez with that story.
A police officer in Minnesota has filed a class action lawsuit against United Airlines over what he says is a rejected refund request. According to the federal lawsuit, the officer claims United refused to refund more than $1,500 for 3 tickets he bought for a vacation flight between Hilton Head and Minneapolis planned for April. United canceled the flight amid the COVID-19 pandemic, and he says United offered him a travel voucher instead of a refund. The lawsuit says travel vouchers provide little security in this public crisis, particularly where many individual Americans need money now to pay for basics like food and rent. Senator Ed Markey has been urging airlines to refund passengers affected by COVID-19, sending letters to airline CEOs.
They're not listening to their passengers. They're going to wind up paying a price for this in the next piece of legislation which we pass.
U.S. carriers have secured almost $60 billion from the federal government as part of the $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus package. There are restrictions for the money. They can't lay off employees through September and must temporarily eliminate stock buybacks. But Markey says they may need to go a step further in the next stimulus bill to ensure passenger refunds.
I think it's just greed. I think that they've received the money from the federal government as part of a bailout to keep the airlines afloat, and they still want to keep the passenger money. for flights that never took place or flights where passengers canceled because they were afraid to fly.
Over the past week, the Department of Transportation has also warned airlines to issue prompt refunds to passengers whose flights were affected by COVID-19. For its part, United tells ABC News, "We were served with a complaint on Tuesday night and are reviewing it. Eligible travelers can request a refund if their flights have been severely adjusted or service to their destination suspended, either due to government mandates or United schedule reductions related to COVID-19.
And Gio Benitez joins us now. Gio, we just saw that response from United Airlines there. What exactly qualifies for a refund? And is there anything else that the airlines are doing to respond to passengers who have been impacted by COVID-related cancellations?
Yeah, Lindsay, so United just sent us their policy. Let me read it to you because it says this: if we change your flight and can't get you to your destination, international or domestic, within 6 hours, we will refund your ticket. And those travel vouchers, Delta and United tell us, they are now good for 2 years. Lindsay.
Gio Benitez, thanks so much. Just ahead, coronavirus and the environment. Silent streets and empty skies may be temporarily helping, but right before our eyes, something else is happening. Our in-depth report on a possible 6th extinction and what that could mean for pandemics in the future. And he can't even drive yet, but one teen is not letting that stop him in his mission to help hospitals in need. But first, our tweet of the day, a former president weighing in on next steps.
New Jersey's Governor Phil Murphy says coronavirus cases are still on the rise in his state, along with deaths. Murphy announced he's moving the primary voting day in the state from June to July.
We need to continue to be absolutely vigilant and, if anything, tighten as opposed to loosen.
In New York, the number of new cases and hospitalizations is continuing to level off, but deaths are at their highest yet.
There's no doubt that we are now bending the curve, and there's no doubt that we can't stop doing what we're doing. That's the good news. The bad news isn't just bad. The bad news is actually terrible. Highest single day death toll yet, 779 people.
Deaths are also up in Louisiana. Tuesday, 642 people died. The number of confirmed cases also increased.
Who is more likely to die of coronavirus?
Here in New York City, coronavirus is infecting and killing Hispanics and blacks at disproportionately high rates. Mayor Bill de Blasio said it reflects economic inequality and access to care. Hispanics here comprise 34% of those who have died of the virus, but they're 29% of the population. Blacks are 22% of the population, but 28% of the deaths.
There are clear inequalities, clear disparities in how this disease is affecting the people of our city. Because again, healthcare still in this country is based on how much money you have.
In the UK, there's word that the condition of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who's hospitalized for the coronavirus, is improving.
Moved to St. Thomas's Hospital here on Sunday evening, Boris Johnson continues his treatment.
He has been sitting up in bed and engaging positively with the clinical team.
Medically, his condition is described as stable, and he's not been put on a ventilator.
On Wall Street, stocks rallied today with optimism that cases in Italy and Spain continue to dip.
Bernie Sanders has suspended his campaign for president. It comes amid the coronavirus crisis that stopped campaigning in its tracks.
I cannot, in good conscience, continue to mount a campaign that cannot win and which would interfere with the important work required of all of us in this difficult hour.
An ABC News investigation confirming through 4 sources that the National Committee on Medical Intelligence was aware as early as November of COVID-19's uncontrolled spread in China. The report details how an out-of-control disease could pose a serious threat to U.S. forces stationed in Asia.
Welcome back. The challenges that we feel here are certainly being felt across the globe. And while it has been jarring, to say the least, for the planet, it's been a bit of a reprieve, a break from the relentless human activity that has led to pollution and plants and animals dying at an alarming rate. Before the pandemic began, there was a startling report that caught our eye. A UN agency claimed that pollution would need to be cut in half in order to save our remaining wildlife. Well, before COVID-19 stopped us all in our tracks, our Maggie Rulli traveled around the globe speaking with scientists. And after the onset of COVID-19, our team asked, is there a link between what's being called the 6th extinction and pandemics? Here's what she learned.
As humans, we feel the impact of this pandemic shutting down city after city. Its deafening silence growing louder with each shuttered airport, museum, bustling tourist destination that's now left empty. But the planet feels something different. Without people flying and driving, pollution levels across Europe are dropping. In some places by as much as half in just the first week they went on lockdown. Satellite images over China earlier this year show a dramatic change in air quality after that country came to a standstill. It's a glimpse into a planet without humans, without deforestation, mining, drilling, traffic, travel. Scientists say our actions are one of the biggest threats to the planet and its other animals and plants, some even connecting them to the threat of pandemics.
We bring wild animals closer to us when we disrupt ecosystems, and with them come viruses, because all of the wild animals in all the jungles and swamps in the world carry their own viruses. And those viruses, some of them are potentially very dangerous to us.
Even before our lives were changed by COVID-19, across the planet, ecosystems have been being disrupted on a scale like we've never seen in modern times. In Antarctica, 20% of its ice melting in just days during an unprecedented heat wave. In our oceans, roughly half the world's coral reefs have been lost in the last 30 years. Our rainforests, which once grew over 14% of the land on Earth, now cover only 6%. And with this loss of land, another dramatic toll. A global phenomenon. Up to 1 million species of plants and animals are at risk of extinction. A staggering 40% of insects under threat. And scientists believe it could all happen within the next few decades.
I think it was the understanding that the extinction rates that are ongoing right now are so much higher than we thought they were. That's phenomenal. So put that in context, there's only 8 million known species on the Earth. So if we're going to cause an extinction of 1 million of them, that is a really significant impact on the plant and animal life on the planet.
It's a threat so serious, biodiversity loss is now considered one of the biggest existential threats to the human race, next to climate change and nuclear weapons.
Humans are causing this, and it really is catastrophic. We're just now beginning to see how catastrophic since the 1500s, when humans really started launching their assault on the planet. We've just had around 300 extinctions, but the number of species that are threatened with extinction has exploded in the last few years.
A recent study shows as much as 50% of the number of animals that once shared the earth with us are already gone, as are billions of populations. That government study, published in a peer-reviewed science journal, doesn't mince words. They call it a biological annihilation that represents a frightening assault on the foundations of human civilization.
The way species come together to form habitats and ecosystems, and how they build on each other, and the kinds of services those ecosystems provide to people, we're becoming more and more aware how much humans depend on these ecosystems and their functioning. And as we unravel the web of life, take one species after another away, we're actually eating away at the basic functions that support human life on Earth, and that's really alarming.
While extinction is nothing new, scientists say the rate at which species are dying off is unprecedented. Recent estimates put the current extinction rate at more than 1,000 times higher than normal, leading many scientists to say we are at the beginning of the 6th mass extinction.
When you get rates of extinction that high, you begin to get into a mass extinction. It's really significant, and we haven't seen this in the history of keeping records.
In the last 500 million years, there have been 5 of these catastrophic extinction events, when the majority of the species on Earth disappeared in the blink of a geological eye. Those extinctions were usually due to catastrophic global events or widespread environmental changes. But today, this so-called 6th mass extinction is not being caused by some asteroid. Most scientists say it's us. From the clothes we wear to the cars we drive, the trees we cut down to the fossil fuels we've used, the food we consume to the houses we build, the vacations we take to the face scrubs we buy. On a day-to-day basis, many leading scientists say humans are the single most dangerous threat to this biodiversity crisis.
It's just a big call to Earth and to humanity everywhere. And we actually need to do something about it now. We're not on a sustainable pathway, and we're certainly on a pathway that is going to undermine the health and well-being of our children.
And we don't have to wait and see what the consequences could be. We're living them. As the worst pandemic the world has seen in a century rips around the globe, scientists say the blame lays in part with us.
It's part of a pattern that reflects things that we are doing.
In 2012, David Quammen wrote about the likelihood of a novel coronavirus starting in an animal and spreading around the world in his book Spillover: Animal Infections and the Next Human Pandemic. He says things like urban sprawl, pesticides, international trade, all of these new developments have altered ecosystems and crushed biodiversity. In the process, viruses are often let loose.
The choices that we're making in terms of what we eat, what we wear, how much we travel, what sort of consumer goods, including consumer electronics, we buy, how many children we have, all of those things are putting pressure on the natural world. And when we do that, we bring wild animals closer to us.
The CDC estimates that about 3/4 of new human diseases originate in animals. Ebola, SARS, bird flu, and now COVID-19. It's believed all started as pathogens crossing from animals to humans.
This is not the last. Another spillover, more spillovers of viruses from wild animals into humans, I would say, are inevitable as long as we keep doing what we're doing, multiplying and consuming and pushing against the rest of the world of nature.
Researchers say we can see this push happening on a massive scale right before our eyes. Before this pandemic, we have been tracking the effects of biodiversity loss across the globe.
Oh my God! Oh my God! This is apocalyptic. This is in the middle of the day. Holy.
Just this past winter, we watched as parts of Australia ignited, sparking months of raging wildfires.
The wind
wind and heat and flames are really starting to pick up. You can hear everything burning behind you, that smoke coming off, stinging the eyes. The heat radiating off this flames is so intense right now. Everything along this highway is just going up in flames. More than 30 million acres left charred. Australia is home to some of the oldest geological features in the world and to some of the most unique and extraordinarily diverse wildlife. The kangaroo, the wombat, the wallaby, and the koala bear. Or at least it has been.
It's scary when you think of how many are lost, and there's still so much you can learn from them.
Oh, we have lost thousands. Thousands of koalas, thousands of so many other species. It's just criminal. This is the worst event this country's ever seen, without a doubt. Horrific.
Shane Flanagan's the director at the Koala Hospital in New South Wales.
See here, there's burns there, but they've all healed. That was all red raw, and it's all growing back nicely now. So.
She and her team have been on the front lines of those historic wildfires in Australia. She says she's seen how record-breaking temperatures and months of severe drought, fueled in part by climate change, have ripped through Australia's delicate ecosystem. Her hospital has taken in dozens of koalas that have been burned or lost their habitat, like Paul.
He's a very shy little koala.
Paul went viral after being saved back in November at a nature reserve. He was named after the human who rescued him.
Hi, Paul.
See how he's lost hair?
Yeah.
And all the fur's really all growing back.
Paul is one of the lucky ones. Shane says even if they can get to animals in time, often their burns are just too severe.
Do you think it's a warning call for Americans?
Yes.
Yeah, how so?
Yes. Well, we've got to change the way we live. You know, we've got to stop being such big consumers. Mother Earth's very, very angry with all of us, and this is what's happening.
Now, she says she fears some species, like the koala, may never recover.
Up until when these fires happened, never thought that would be a possibility. But if we have another few seasons like this, you know, over the next few summers, heaven help the populations out there. And I say shame, Australia, shame. Not on our watch though, eh, Amanda?
Australia was a fiery wake-up call on climate change. The problem there only made worse by issues with land management and arson. Images of what's believed to be the world's oldest continent burning went viral. But scientists say climate change isn't the only threat to biodiversity.
There are a number of things that cause this, including habitat destruction, pollution, over-harvesting. And so that, along with the growing threat of climate change, means that more and more species are threatened with extinction now than ever before in the history of humans.
As the human population swells to an estimated 11 billion by the end of the century, more and more people are competing for more and more of Earth's precious and dwindling resources. Often caught in the crosshairs, unique ecosystems and their one-of-a-kind wildlife. Even the birthplace of evolution is not immune. The Galapagos Islands, an otherworldly landscape filled with wildlife so unique it can border on the bizarre. Animals only found on these islands: the marine iguana, the Galapagos giant tortoise, and penguin. It was here that Charles Darwin was inspired to write his theory of evolution. But now, the islands that spawned Darwin's survival of the fittest could be facing a fight for survival themselves, challenged by their own popularity. 21st century threats like bucket list tourism and plastic pollution are threatening their very existence. Before this outbreak, the number of visitors exploded from just 5,050 years ago to more than 250,000 tourists visiting the islands just last year. Many here to see those same unique animals that inspired Darwin, like the blue-footed boobies and the always popular, overly friendly sea lions.
Tourism is a double-edged sword. It can be good and it can be bad. So let's make sure that we manage tourism the best possible way, and we use tourism as a conservation tool. The Galapagos is conserved more than 95% of its biodiversity. And the reason for that is partially or mostly because of the tourism we have here. Tourists become a public constituency that defends the conservation of Galapagos.
The conservation efforts are strong here. 97% of the islands are off limits to the public.
Please
never go outside of the trail.
Visits are hyper-organized, and while in the park, tourists must be with a professional guide the entire time.
Can we bring it home?
No, we cannot bring anything from here. Those are Galapagos National Park rules.
Despite these extraordinary efforts, even a place called the Cradle of Biodiversity cannot escape the biodiversity crisis.
When you come to experience the vast beauty of the Galapagos, you probably don't stop to think about the enormous amount of trash that tourists and locals alike create.
Boating around the Galapagos with Juan Pablo, a marine scientist at the Galapagos Science Center, we see the land that these unique animals need to survive now covered in plastics.
Every single thing that floats eventually have the potentiality to arrive here. In the past was wood, now it's plastic.
So where does all this plastic, all this trash come from?
I mean, it comes from everywhere, from the States, it can come from Europe, it can come from Japan, it comes from everywhere.
On land, the amount is multiplied.
Seeing it up close, you see there's so many different types of trash in here, types of plastic. You have like a hard hat,
yeah,
gasoline containers, some type of bottling container,
yeah,
plastic bottle, plastic bottle, plastic bottle.
The bottles, that's pretty much roughly the 80% of the debris that you find in the Galapagos. Bottles, one way or another, plastics is forever. Even though you do the best thing to recycle, it's gonna be a little bit of release of microplastics.
Yeah.
That is going to end up in the air or in the ocean.
And what exactly are microplastics?
I want to show you that. I want to actually show you what is microplastics.
Oh, it's like, oh God, you can see it coming off in the air even.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we can make, you see this?
Yeah.
So you
can see the dust of blue.
Yeah,
oh my gosh, look on your hand.
And that's the real problem.
Yeah.
That's something that we don't know how to avoid. Because we can easily clean this macro debris.
But how do you clean up dust?
Exactly, how you clean dust. So the best thing to do is attack this problem from the source before I arrive here, because once I arrive here, it's probably too late to do something about it.
Because once it's here, it means it's already in our oceans and in our animals. There are more than 51 trillion microplastic particles in the ocean. That's more than 500 times the number of stars in the Milky Way. Fish end up eating these microplastics, and we end up eating the fish. Pollution from these plastics and toxins, overfishing, and warming waters are wreaking havoc on marine environments. It's estimated at least 40% have already been severely altered. And for the islands, often called the living laboratory of evolution, the stakes have never been higher.
How do you change the minds of people when we've all gotten so used to this disposable lifestyle?
They need to see this. They need. I think that's important that that everybody actually understand that the most pristine places in this planet are like this, full of plastic.
You have a single planet. There's no planet B, okay? And you have places in the many different countries that are unique, that are fantastic. Places that are so beautiful and so important that they go beyond the political boundaries. And Galapagos is one of them. Politically, yes, Galapagos belongs to Ecuador. Emotionally and in terms of heritage, it belongs to the world.
But it's not only these exquisite remote parts of the world that are under threat. To see the beginnings of what some scientists are calling the sixth mass extinction, we just have to look in our own backyard. The United Kingdom, where I now live, is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, with 1 in 7 species facing extinction and more than half in decline. Home of the Industrial Revolution, the UK has spent the last 200 years or so altering its landscape, building cities, draining wetlands, and turning forests into farmland. Isabella Tree and her husband, Charles Burrell, inherited the Napa estate from his family. They had been farming on its 3,500 acres for generations. But she says despite working at it for nearly 2 decades, they could not get the old wetlands to produce enough food to make a profit.
Finally, after about 17 years of trying and battering our heads against a brick wall with farming, we were £1.5 million in debt and realised we couldn't go on. We began to look at something that would work with the land rather than battling against it all the time. And that's really when we stumbled on rewilding.
She says the concept's quite simple. You pretty much do nothing and just let the land turn back to being wild.
The year after we had restored the land, the soil, and we just walked out into a landscape that felt completely different. We were kicking up common blue butterflies and grasshoppers everywhere you went. The sound of insects, it was something we hadn't even known we'd been missing as farmers. And of course, when the insects come back, so do the birds. You know, watching wild animals, you know, pass our windows, and that moment of just hearing the insects. We had travelled, you know, all over the world to look at wildlife, and we'd never once thought about what we were doing in our own backyard, and that we should be teeming with wildlife where we lived.
After starting small, they went bigger, letting more and more land go wild and bringing in larger animals.
In all our imaginings of what pre-human impact Europe would have looked like, what the landscape would have looked like, we've completely forgotten about the huge herds of roaming animals that would have been here. All these animals would have been out there in the landscape, driving a very complex, shifting, dynamic kaleidoscope of habitats. So if you put these animals back into the landscape, let them drive the system, then extraordinary things begin to happen. Biodiversity comes back.
Walking with her on a rainy winter day before the pandemic on the English countryside, we saw wild pigs, foxes, and birds. She says that's just the beginning.
Within 20 years, we've become one of the most significant areas in Britain for some of our rarest species. These incredibly rare species that have found us because the habitat has returned. But more than that, we've just got this extraordinary biomass of species. So if you go out into the scrub on a spring morning at dawn, the sound of the birds is so loud, literally your stomach is reverberating. You can feel it in your lungs.
The Napa State now offers safaris on their land, and summer bookings are already nearly sold out. Rewilding might not be the solution for everyone. After all, the world still needs farms to produce enough food for humans to survive. But Isabella says the two can work together.
Rewilding and regenerative farming will work hand in hand. If we're going to recover ecosystems on which all of biodiversity depends, including our own species, we've got to be more generous with nature. We've got to give half our land mass across the planet back to nature. And I think rewilding is how you do that.
As a planet, we still have a long way to go. The UK may have been one of the first to industrialize, but the rest of the globe soon followed. Right now, it's estimated that just 25% of the land is free from human activity, and by 2050, it's predicted that number will drop to 10%. But as Isabella writes in her book Wilding, she's discovered it doesn't have to be that way.
What we've shown here is that nature will bounce back if you let it, if you put the right drivers in place and just allow it to happen.
This pandemic has already showed us that animals will return. Some animals emerging from nearby forests across the globe, taking over the streets they once shared with humans. So why should you care about the biodiversity crisis? As scientists around the world scramble to find a cure for COVID-19, many may be looking to the natural world for help. About 50% of modern drugs have been developed from natural products. And with 1 in 5 plant species under threat of extinction, the world could lose its cure for the next virus to biodiversity loss before it's even been discovered. That's why leading scientists say now is the time to act. In a United Nations Agreement on Nature, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity calls for almost a third of the world's oceans and land to be protected by 2030. An aggressive goal, they say, is our best shot at reversing biodiversity loss and ensuring the survival of humanity.
Understanding that the future is in our hands, in everybody's hands. We can't leave it to politicians, and we've got to fight to change.
I think maybe 5 years ago I would have been maybe a little more pessimistic, but one of the things I've been really so happy about in the last 2 to 3 years is how much attention the decline of nature is getting.
The sixth mass extinction may have already started, but there is still time to slow it down and to make sure that humans are not a part of it.
Put policies in place and action plans in place in 2020. We can do it together in 10 years to deliver a whole planet. It's very doable with human ingenuity. It is very doable. If you ever thought the things that you do don't matter, they absolutely matter. And I would urge you to start small, take on a few things that you could do for the planet tomorrow, take on another couple things in 2 weeks' time, and pretty soon we will be on a road to a healthier planet, a stabilized climate, and a biodiverse planet where we can all be able to see the Sumatran rhino in the future.
Maggie Bruley, ABC News, London.
Our thanks to Maggie for that. Much more to report on tonight on ABC News Prime. And this teen, he can't drive, but he certainly knows how to fly and how he's using that skill to help the battle against COVID-19. And later in the show, the hero nurse battling against COVID-19 and the surprise celebration she never expected.
Our milk is made into cheese, as is most of the milk in Wisconsin made into cheese. And a lot of that cheese is destined for food service industry consumption. Schools, pizzerias, restaurants, conferences, etc. Since the stay-at-home orders have been issued, those markets have dried up completely. Therefore, our milk is getting processed into a product that doesn't have an end-use home at this time. We've been asked to dispose of 20% of our milk going forward for the next 6 weeks, and we will not be getting paid for that milk as it stands right now. So we're asking the USDA to do a major buy on cheese and dairy products and get it into the hands of the food insecure, the school children, the unemployed, the food banks, etc. Get that milk off the market, get it consumed into the people that need it.
That was Gordon Spears, the owner of Shiloh Dairy in eastern Wisconsin. He's a member of the Edge Dairy Cooperative, which, along with the Wisconsin Farm Bureau, is calling on the USDA to purchase milk that is going to waste as restaurants and schools forced to shut down no longer need dairy products. Dairy farmers with no more room to store excess product and cows still producing milk have taken to dumping their milk. Well, that poses an environmental risk, and milk could easily pollute rivers and other bodies of water. State officials in Wisconsin have posted rules for farmers who are forced to dispose of their product. And now for more on Mother Nature. Severe weather is hitting more than 50 million Americans in the Midwest and Mid-South, including the Ohio Valley, Tennessee Valley, Mississippi Valley, and parts of the Southeast. The images tonight: large hail in Winnebago, Illinois, and storm damage to a church in New Kensington, Pennsylvania. There's a threat for severe weather from Arkansas to Virginia. We know that coronavirus has already affected too many families, and now it has hit our ABC News family as well. Our talented studio camera operator, Tony Greer, passed away from complications due to coronavirus this week. He worked at Good Morning America for more than 6 years, and he was a beloved member of our team. Tony loved meeting the celebrities on the show. He loved his music, his hometown of Chicago, but more than anything, Tony loved his family. Our thoughts and prayers are with them all tonight. We'll be right back. heroes, now a survivor. Lee White, a nurse at Louisiana's Willis-Knighton Hospital, still fighting COVID, but now off of the ventilator and well enough to recover at home. Her coworkers lined the hallways there to celebrate. He doesn't have a driver's license, but that's not stopping a Virginia teen from helping get supplies to workers on the front lines. 16-year-old TJ Kim didn't drive the supplies to hospitals. Look at that. He flew them. He came up with Operation Supplies Over Skies, and every week a different pilot in training flies supplies to small hospitals in need. TJ's goal is to make deliveries to all 7 rural hospitals in Virginia defined as critical access facilities. Genius idea. Before we go tonight, the image of the day. That's not an employee at a cake shop in Athens, Greece, preparing chocolate. Or that is an employee. I said that's not. That is an employee. And you see there the chocolate bunnies decked out with face masks. Even the Easter bunny needs to play it safe. That is our show for this hour. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us, and have a great night.